My name is Matt LaPoint from MOTU. I'm based in Los Angeles area. I've been with MOTU for quite a number of years, over 15 years. So I primarily work here in LA, which is a big market for us. Film composers, producers that use DP day in, day out for scoring films, working on record projects. So I also work in, as a film score mixer and engineer. So the way that I want to talk about Digital Performer is the way that I use it, the way that I see people use it, and kind of give you the fastest way to use these tools. Even though there's a million ways inside Digital Performer that you can use these tools. I want to kind of show you real world examples of how we do it. So today, the lesson maybe you saw from the actual, I've got my note here, we're going to talk about things like temporary groups, memory cycle, the new strips that are now in DP10, and we're going to talk about using memory selection and in terms of getting the transport where you are when you're doing editing. Cool. All right, so I'm going to screen share. And let's go over here to Digital Performer. Can everybody see DP? You guys seeing that? Okay, great. Excellent. Thanks for your visual feedback there. Okay, cool. So we've got obviously an empty project here, not much going on. I just want to take a couple minutes. I'm sure a lot of you are very advanced users, but just very quickly go over some basic things in DP. So right off the bat under setup, let's just go into our audio MIDI setup. And you can see I've got a couple devices here in AMS. I've got a MIDI interface from MOTU plugged in because I've got a Roland TD6 drum kit that doesn't have USB. So whenever you have non-USB MIDI devices, they need to connect to an actual USB interface. And MOTU makes a full line of MIDI interfaces. So here's a 2-in, 2-out fast lane. There's my Roland TD6. Anything that's just USB, obviously most of you have controllers that are USB. They'll just, once you install the driver, or if they're class compliant, they'll just appear colorful in AMS. That's the key. If something's not working with your MIDI controller, chances are you go to your MIDI setup and it's inactive. It's either on a port that's not giving you enough power, the driver's not installed, something will tell you. So we're in the audio MIDI setup, everything looks colorful and ready to go. So we can quit audio MIDI setup. You can see I'm on a Macintosh computer. We're going to go back to setup. Let's go down to configure audio system hardware driver. I'm using MOTU's 1248 audio interface. It's connected via USB. It could be, Thunderbolt connected as well. You can see I've got a full list of other devices or drivers that appear on my computer. The CalDigit hub that I use that's Thunderbolt actually has an audio jack on it, so I could use it as an audio interface. Of course, I can use the built-in computer drivers as well, but we're going to use the 1248. I've got it set to 48 kilohertz is the sample rate. And you can see the clock mode is now controlled by the actual hardware itself. There was a day in DP where you would set the clock source from this window, but now you would go to the actual interface as it appeared on your computer and set the clock, whether it's internally clocked or externally clocked. So the 1248 is the clock master. And we all know buffer size has to do with the latency, right? So when you're triggering virtual instruments or you're recording where you're monitoring through Digital Performer, what's the latency? What's the round trip latency? So the buffer of 256 is pretty low generally. I mean, for virtual instruments, that's pretty, even for sensitive people, that's a pretty decent amount. You can certainly go down and, that'll put more strain on the computer, but just be aware of that. The one thing about DP is playback will always be sample accurate. So it's the kind of thing where as you're working, you might be with virtual instruments running at lower buffers. Now, if you're in the mix stage, you can raise that buffer up to 1024 or even higher if your driver supports it. But the good news is when you raise your buffer high again, DP will compensate for latency, will compensate, everything will play back perfectly. So you might track at a lower buffer, raise your buffer up high again while you're mixing to give your computer a little bit of a break and have more resources available. Work priority, this is something that 99% of the time you can just leave on high. Once in a while, if you're using a certain type of audio interface that has a certain kind of driver setting, we might suggest changing the work priority to medium. But I would say leave it on default, which is set to high. It just has to do with the threading of the audio interface, the way that the driver is utilized. So let's just leave it on high for that. So we're going to hit OK. So we've got the MIDI setup going, we've got the audio setup going. The next thing I want to do before we actually dive into these features today is let's go to the bundles window. So under Studio, we're going to go down to bundles. And let's just go back for a minute. We're all getting used to these shortcuts. Shift U, the up arrow is Shift. Shift U. will take us to the bundles. The bundles is our I/O setup, right? What inputs are we using? What outputs are we using? Buses, and so on and so forth. So on the input side, this shows me the hardware that I'm using, the 1248, and I've actually named these inputs and outputs from the hardware level. Inside our 1248, we can name those channels, but whatever audio interface you're using with DP, doesn't have to be MOTU, any third-party audio interface will let you add the channels you want and name the channels. So let's say in your room, you have a tracking room, and you have, let's say, certain input panels, or a drum kit is mic'd up a certain way, and that's a permanent fixture in your studio. And so what's great is that if you go into the bundles window and you add the channels that you need for your analog inputs or digital inputs, you can rename these. So let's just say, in your room you have kick, snare, hat, and so on and so forth. Well, we can name the I/O, and then when we're in the tracks window and we add various inputs, we'll see those names now as a custom built-in ability to add those names. So that's under the bundles window. In inputs, we selected more channels and we name the channels right here in the bundles window. Cool. So you'll also notice in here, we can set it to mono, we can set it to stereo, we can set it to surround as well, and we'll get into that at some point. Today's lesson is really not about that. We're going to focus on other things, but as these series kind of evolve, we're going to get into a lot of interesting topics. Tomorrow we're going to get into pitch shifting, the pitch correction window. There's a lot of cool stuff now that we've added the ZTX algorithm that I want to show you tomorrow if you have time to come back at the same time at 9:30 a.m. So the outputs tab, most of us are working in the box. We don't necessarily come out to a mixing board, but some of us do. But generally speaking, we're coming out of DP in a stereo pair. So I've named my output left and right because I like to have more abbreviated names to not take up as much space here in the tracks window. So you can rename your I/O. Now look, I've got 8 analog outputs on my 1248, so I could actually switch these to a surround output pair. So let's just say, for fun, I set up a 5-1 playback system in my room. Now, the surround matrix here, left, right, center, LFE, left surround, right surround, there are different matrices depending on what you're going to deliver. So you might actually figure out what you need to deliver. And so this is the generic one. So if I actually do set up a surround output, you'll notice if I go into the mixing board, I've got my surround panner. So then I can actually pop up the window and we can get into doing surround panning. However we want. We can do automation. We can do that kind of thing. So that's for another day. Let's go back to the bundles, Shift U, and under outputs, we're going to go back to good old stereo. And now buses, remember, buses are digital pathways inside DP. Sending something to a reverb, sending, a group of tracks to a common auxiliary output or destination. So typically, you can create you can have 128 buses inside DP, and they can be stereo or mono or surround. And you can name your buses. So sometimes when you're mixing, you might actually send a bunch of drum tracks to a drum bus, and that way you can have an overall control of an auxiliary track with your entire kit. So that's an excuse to create buses and be able to name those buses. So this was something I had from a mix session where I had the drums, the bass, and I have what I call a short verb and a long verb, so that when I'm usually you don't want to have a reverb on every channel. Obviously, you want to have maybe a couple of reverbs on auxiliary tracks that we can send to. And so we'll get into that. So buses, and then instruments. So instruments has to do with when you're adding a virtual instrument to Digital Performer that has multiple outputs, you'll see those publish in this instrument tab. So for instance, if we go up to DP and go to Project, Add Instrument Track, we go to Native Instruments, Contact. The latest Contact is just generically named Contact 6. That's the version here, Contact Stereo. So once we instantiate Contact, you can see some of my libraries are on different drives. If we go back to Shift U in the Instrument tab, now look, Contact has lots and lots of outputs. See, many, many, many outputs. So if we wanted to say, well, let's actually use, a pair of outputs from Contact. That's the first pair comes out of the virtual instrument, okay? The second sets of outputs start at 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8. So it's a situation, guys, where you're using Contact or Omnisphere or any any Falcon virtual instrument that supports multiple audio outputs, you might manage those outputs from the Instruments tab in the Bundles window. And again, I know we're kind of going quickly in a way. I want to gauge kind of where everybody's head is, and so, but we're going to just talk a little bit about, you know, inputs and outputs and buses. The last thing here is the MIDI devices, and this is you can see there's my TD6. That's my hardware MIDI device. That's in AMS, Audio MIDI Setup. Now, what's cool about this is for those people who still have some cool old school modules, like remember the 5080 or the 2080 and the Roland modules and things like that. Well, if you had sound cards, library cards that went in those interfaces, you could actually call those up in here. You could go into the MIDI devices and you could actually go into edit. And this is where you can get into things like your ports. You can get into patches. And so that's, again, for the guy that's got outboard, you know, modules and keyboards, and he's got different, you know, patches and expansion cards and stuff like that. So that's under MIDI devices. So cool. And one thing I want to mention is we can always save and export our bundles. So typically, you know, they get saved with your project, and that's great. You open and close it, do your work. Maybe you add bundles, you add inputs or outputs. But if it's something that you dialed in and you really like the way it's set up, you could always go up and save it. You can export your bundles. So you say, well, I'll go to the desktop, Command D, and I'll just say, well, this is ML bundles, and I'll just save it. Now, it's just a simple little tiny file that you could zip or send to another, you know, studio if they had the same hardware configuration. So it's not something you have to do all the time, but it's nice once in a while to be able to export and import your bundles as you customize them. Cool. Okay, so now let's kind of get back to what we were talking about, which is we've talked about setup, the MIDI setup, the hardware setup, the bundles, right? The inputs, the outputs, the names, and so on and so forth. And so now let's actually go, I've got a couple of different chunks. And now chunks is something that, you know, today is not the day to really dive into what chunks really provide you, but the quick answer on chunks is I'm inside one DP project. Okay, this is an entire project. Chunks are basically having sequences inside, separate sequences inside one project. So film composers love this idea of using chunks, you know, because each chunk can have its own MIDI tracks, can have its own audio tracks, automation. Each chunk can have a different start time in reference to movie window. So chunks is a really powerful feature. In fact, that's why a lot of the A-list film composers here in Los Angeles love and use DP, because of this chunks feature. And also tours and playback. You know, DP is widely used on major tours. You know, Mike McKnight, who kind of presented with us at NAMM last year, does all these major tours. He's kind of created this amazing playback system with DP as the main tool, and he's able to do Roger Waters and be able to play back multi-channel stems and audio and do surround mixing and playback right inside Digital Performer. So for Mike McKnight, he's got all the different songs in the Pink Floyd or Roger Waters set list as different sequences in one project. And so maybe we'll do a whole, you know, episode on how Mike sets that up, or how, you know, you guys could utilize that for the work that you do. So I've got an empty chunk here that's play enabled, but I've got a couple of others that we're going to get into. So cool. Let's see. Today what we're supposed to be diving into is the temp groups. Okay, cool. These are actually cool little shortcuts that I think maybe you guys know about, but it's very easy to learn. So here's what we're going to do right off the bat. We're going to add some tracks to DP. Now remember, when you're adding a track, if you hold Option or Alt, you're given the choice to add multiple. So you can say you can add individual tracks, you can add multiple. Let's add multiple MIDI tracks, and let's say 25. Okay, so remember right off the bat in DP, when you're in the tracks window, to do a horizontal or vertical zoom of the size of the track font, Command arrow keys. Command arrow keys is a default assignment for being able to zoom those vertically. And if I go left or right with the arrows, I'm basically zooming the bars to the right there. What bars am I looking at? 1 to 3 and so on and so forth. So remember, Command up and down arrows is the vertical zoom of the track size. So I've got a bunch of tracks in here, and I'd like to color code these. I want to organize these tracks. So what we're going to talk about today are temporary groups. So there are a couple shortcuts in DP that you can easily use that will let you create groups on the fly. And it's very powerful. And the first one we're going to use is the letter T, as in Tom. So, but before we use the tool, let's actually go to the track groups window. The track groups window under Project, Track Groups, and the shortcut is Shift-Option-G. Shift-Option-G is the shortcut to the track groups window. You guys see it up here in the left pane? What we're going to do is go to the mini menu. The mini menu will show us the temporary group type. So now look at what we're seeing here. These are all the attributes that I can select or deselect for a temporary group. And that's just about everything. The only thing I've got turned off is maybe input monitor. I don't necessarily need to worry about having that be a part of my temporary group, but everything else, whether I can see a track, whether I can, volume, edit layers, pan, all the parameters are basically ready to go. Okay, so I've got this set. And by the way, this is a global setting in DP. Once I set it here, it won't just be project specific, it'll be a global setting in DP. Okay, so here's what we did. We went to the track groups window, we went to the mini menu, to set the temporary group. We picked all the types of data that we wanted to be a part of the temporary group. And there's really no harm in making most of it, or not, if not all of it, selected. So now what we're going to do is we're going to highlight a bunch of tracks here, let's say 10 MIDI tracks. Now, if I hold the letter T, I'm now invoking the temporary group, and we'll change the color of those tracks to yellow. So we can highlight these tracks, and now I'm holding the letter T, literally holding down the letter T, as in Tom, and I'm going to switch one color to green, and those tracks that are selected will now all switch to the green color. So all we did was just basically invoke. Now, one of the attributes of that temporary group was track color. So when I held the letter T, it said, oh, now here's the difference. I want you guys to and I'll go over it a few times to make sure we're all on the same page. So T was about creating a temporary group of tracks that are selected. W is about tracks that are visible. So here's the difference. So now I'm going to hold the letter W, and when I switch one color, everybody switches, because now I'm switching the color for all the visible tracks. So the difference between the two tools, W and T was for what's selected, W was for what's visible. So that's actually pretty cool, because then you could just select these, hold T, and say, I want these tracks to be dark blue. I want these tracks here to be blue, this blue, a royal blue, and then this is going to be an orange color. Cool. So that's just, again, and there's a lot of great things you can do beyond, track colors. But I want you guys to see right off the bat, what is the difference between it? The T is about what's selected, and W is about what's visible. Okay, is everybody with me so far? Are you guys all still awake and caffeinated? Okay, good, good. Excellent. So let's do more cool stuff with track groups, and temporary groups, I should say. So we're going to go back to my chunks, okay, over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to play enable the next chunk, which is called MIDI. So sure enough, I've got in here a tiny little sequence with, you can see, 4 MIDI channels. And they are assigned here consecutively to the UVI Workstation. And I'm actually using the MOTU sound bank that comes with DP10. So you guys remember that when you get the license to DP10, we give you a 5 GB sample library that comes with DP. So I'm using some of these samples. So I want to show you what's cool about using the temporary groups with this. So by the way, just as a side note, when we double click on Workstation, and usually I like to go to the top and click on Multi, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 MIDI channels. I've got a 2D orchestra patch, cello, sustain, pianissimo, and so on. And then if I wanted to add more, I could just hit plus, add more channels. Each instance will have 16 MIDI channels. And by the way, as a quick side note, we haven't really talked about this yet, but if you have a computer that has multiple cores for the processor, each virtual instrument gets assigned to a core. So then as you're designing a system, let's say you're in the market for a new computer, you might consider buying a machine that has more cores if you're into the kind of work that needs a lot of virtual instruments. So generally, you don't want to put too many sounds in one instance. It's better to actually have a few more instances of a virtual instrument with less sounds in them, because you don't want one core to work necessarily too hard. So that's sort of a technical side note, but we've got essentially four different instruments happening here. And by the way, when you double click on an empty, it opens up the browser. You can see I've got quite a number of sound banks here in this project, but I can go to MOTU instruments and I can start navigating for, and this is all something that you guys have the ability to do now with DP10, is if I'm looking for, trombones, oh, hey, let's add trombone sus, we'll just drag it up here. Now it's assigned to channel 5. I can mute it, I can solo it, I can pan it, but I'll just leave it alone because we're going to close Workstation. We'll close the window, we're going to save. So we have just a simple little cue here that's basically what, 4 measures long. I'm going to play it. If you guys have phones, you'll be able to hear it. So. Okay, nothing fancy, obviously, but what I wanted to essentially do is just put in a bunch of notes that now we can use these temporary groups to do something interesting with it. So let's say what we want to do is I want to put a volume swell in across the whole orchestra. We want to do a dynamic, let's say a crescendo across that. Okay, now I don't have to necessarily do it for each track individually. I can do this now across all these MIDI tracks in one shot using the temporary group that we talked about. So here's how we're going to do it. Now, you'll notice down below, you guys, this is where we see the notes. Obviously, you can see the piano scroll. And of course, this pane below, this is where we get into the controller data, CCs or on velocities, off velocities, and of course, controller data like modulation, expression, volume. That's all down below. So I've got this layer now selected on volume. Okay. And so now what we're going to do is I'm going to double click W. Okay, I want to do all the visible tracks. These are the visible tracks. So I'm going to double tap W, tap, tap. And now I'm going to pencil in kind of right to left a swell. And I'm using the spline tool. And so let me hit return. And so let's play it. That's kind of interesting to be able to have a crescendo. So remember, if we didn't use the temporary group feature, we would have had to do that for every track separately, which is time consuming. So that was a nice sort of case use for using the temporary group. By the way, whenever you create a temporary group, you have to single tap the letter to release the group. So if I single tap W, now if I look at the track selector and show just the 2D orchestra, it's got the volume swell. If I switch to the cello layer, it has the volume swell. So you'll see that all the tracks got the same volume move that I put in one shot, just because we used this temporary tool. Do you guys follow? That was actually a pretty cool thing. So again, you're working on a cue for somebody, you've got this song, you've got all these MIDI tracks, and you want everything to kind of basically do a really nice decrescendo, or you want to change the dynamics, and you don't have to sit there and think, okay, what tracks do I have to automate? No, I can just do it with a temporary group. All I have to do is make those tracks visible in the MIDI window. It could be in the sequence editor, but generally I like to do MIDI in this window here. So we're in the MIDI window, and remember, I double tap the W key, and as I put in the volume move, it's going to put it across all the visible MIDI tracks. Cool. So that was how we were using those tools. All right, so we can leave that there, or let's go back to the undo history for a moment, and let's just talk for a minute about the undo history. Remember how it shows us when we started, what we've been doing, what kinds of moves have we done. So I can actually go back in time before I did the volume move. We can always jump back. Cool. All right, so let's move on to the next thing. I want to talk about using the temporary groups for audio tracks and audio automation. So what we're going to do is double click now on this chunk called audio. So let it play enable, and you can see I've got a project here. It was an interesting project because it was a transfer off of an 8-track analog. It was a film score recorded in London in the early 80s. And I'm actually remixing this project. And the engineer did an excellent job. I mean, it sounds very good. It's just that he only had a few microphones. And what's interesting is he didn't do it with a normal sort of Decca tree. And so it's been a challenge to kind of create a stereo image the right way. But here are the 8 tracks, and this is the mix session. The way I have these organized, I've got these organized in a folder, color-coded, And also I like to have a folder for masters, which are basically my reverb and my master fader. I like to have those in a separate folder. Of course, everybody has their own sort of method and their track colors that they use and the way they organize their sessions. So this is a mix session here, but let's talk about those temporary groups that we've learned about, and how does that apply to editing audio and also dealing with audio automation. So let's go into the sequence window, because the sequence window is the window that we use for doing audio editing, of course. So before we get into volume, how can I use those temporary tools for just general audio editing? Well, let's do that. I'm going to grab the wiper. Now remember, guys, you have the ability to grab the wiper, hold control, and drag down to zoom in. You can always zoom with the wiper. Control drag will let you do that. Control drag the wiper. So now here's what I want to do. I want to edge edit these tracks, or how about we just decide we want to do a little surgery on these tracks? Well, I'm going to double tap W. Okay, let's do it together. Double tap W, tap, tap. I grab the fade and all the fade handles. And now let's actually edge edit these tracks. See, well, let me make sure that we're all selected here. So, by the way, when I double tap the W, now everybody is going to get edited the same way because I've created a temporary group to edit the tracks. So now I can delete these. I can change their fade handles. I can edge edit the start and end of it. And scrubbing. All because I just double tap the W key. So all the visible tracks in the window are now doing what I do to one gets done to all the tracks that are visible. So I just double tapped W. So again, like, let's do a little bit of editing here. Let's pick these all up. So like we can actually pick these up and move these tracks. They're all going to be selected because of that temporary group that we use, the double tap the W key. Cool. So that's great for being able to edit. So let's do it on this. Let's go out here. We're going to maybe clean up the beginning of this piece. So we're going to control drag the wiper. And now I've already got the temporary group W tapped. So now we can edge edit these, move these here. You know, or if I want to delete something, let's say we want to delete something out of the middle of this. Look, it's already selected all the tracks because of the temporary tool. So I can delete. If I want to snip it, I can do that with Command J. I can snip. So that's really fast, because think of it this way, guys. You know, you've got a bunch of drum tracks, and now it's time to go in and edit the tracks. Now, you don't want to edit them necessarily individually. You always want to, with drum tracks, maintain phase. You want to make sure that you're treating the kit as almost one entity. So if you're using the temporary group, double tap W, and now you're moving, you're edge editing, you're making cuts, you're flying things around, but you're doing it across all the visible drum tracks. And so I find it to be very, very useful to have the ability to do that. Now, one other quick thing that we can talk about is, I use this one a lot as well, which is, let's say you put the wiper at a very important point. You can select all, Command A, and Option Y will always cut at the wiper. Option Y is cut at the wiper. And that's a useful one that we use a lot too, because you're down in the weeds, you're making a very precise cut for a punch. And so in order for me to Option Y, I select all. Option Y makes a cut right at the wiper, and that works really well. Okay, so let's talk about audio automation. Okay, how can we use the temporary tools that we're learning here when it comes to audio automation? It's similar in a way to MIDI, but it's a little bit different. So, okay, so this, you guys are working on a project where you have things in an audio state, and now you're in the mixing board. And let's go here and go to the mixing board. Okay, so let's say as you're mixing this project, you know, that you've got your blend going. You haven't done any automation yet, but you have everything kind of set where it feels like it's sitting pretty well in the mix. And now you kind of feel like, you know what, it would be a good time now to do a save as of the project. It's always a good idea whenever you make a sort of fundamental change to your project, go ahead and go up to File and do a save as. Now the difference with save as and save a copy as will create the new save version, but now you're running off that actual saved version. So you're now running on the new version. So if I say zoom 1, I'll say 1A, save. If I do a save a copy as, it makes a copy, but I'm still on the other project. So save as puts you on the new project. Save a copy as creates the backup, but then you're still working on the other project. Cool. Okay, so where were we? Oh, we were kind of still finessing. We have our, we're all in a state when we're working on our projects where we're balancing the tracks, we're getting it kind of where it feels right. Now we're going to take a snapshot. So what is a snapshot? Snapshot is going to write in volume lines for where all the levels live. So let's do that. I'm going to go back to the sequence window. And now watch what's going to happen. What I'm going to do here. We're looking at the soundbite layer. Let's actually hold Option and switch to the volume layer. Okay? Whenever you switch one layer holding Option, all the tracks will switch to that layer. So Option switch to volume, they all switch to volume. So now you can see there's no volume information in these tracks, so I'm going to put that in there. So I'm going to select all. Now you'll notice at the bottom of the window, there's a little camera icon. But there's also a really handy shortcut that you guys will learn very quickly, and that is Control Quotation. Control Quotation, or you can use the camera icon. It brings up the automation snapshot. So here's the idea. We pre-mix our song to a certain level. Now we want to do two things. We want to be able to sort of write it in. That way nothing gets changed accidentally. And the other thing about that, of course, is that once we have volume automation data, then we can obviously create automation moves. So that's sort of a big part of my workflow is get everything going, get it pre-mixed, then do a snapshot. So now we're going to do it from the counter. I like to take my snapshots from bar 1, from the very beginning, and we're going to do the tracks showing. Yep, that's right. The current data types, yes, volume. I only want volume. So when I use current data types, that means whatever layer I'm in, that's what's going to be taken in the snapshot. So I hit OK. Now, sure enough, wherever I had those levels in the mixing board, it's now put a line in there. And so now I have a reference point for automation. So now how can we use those temporary tools that we talked about? Remember, for those of you who have just come on maybe a little bit later on in the presentation, we're talking about in the track groups window, we have what are called, let me make sure it's active, set temporary groups. What are the attributes of the temporary groups window? Set it once, it's global. Then the letter T will let you invoke the temporary group for the tracks that are selected. And then W was a way to invoke the temporary track group for visible tracks. So let's do that in here. Double tap W. Boom, I just put an automation line across all the visible tracks. So this is really cool when it comes to mixing, because let's say we want to do the fade out. I can click in a dot, and then boom, we just did a fade out there. So now we're going to leave it out here. That's fine. And we don't need this point, so we'll just drag it down. This one, we're going to move. So see what I'm doing here is that because I've invoked the temporary group with double tapping the W key, I'm putting automation lines across the entire mix. And that's so fast. So let's say we want to lower this section right here. We're going to pull this down a little bit here. And we're going to pull this down a little bit here. This gets faded out. This little section here gets a little bit hotter because it's kind of quiet. But that's so fast. How do we do that? Let's just back up for a minute. So remember, we took our snapshot, right? We put in volume lines from wherever we took the snapshot. We put in volume lines from the beginning. So all I'm doing, guys, in the sequence editor is double tapping W, and when I click on a point on the line, it will put a point across all the lines for all the tracks. So you'll have to do that today, practice that, and make sure that you understand, because once you do it, it's great. It'll really speed up your workflow. In fact, now I want to talk about a very, very cool way to change the mix level. Now that we've got these points in here, and this is an easy one that you guys will pick up very quickly. Probably already know, I'm sure you do. So here's the deal. If we highlight, let's say we lasso a section, okay? Basically a lasso means that you can see that we're able to drag across multiple points across multiple tracks. So those yellow dots mean, okay, they're ready to go, they're selected. What are we going to do with these now? Well, check this out. If we go up to region, okay, region, change continuous data. Change continuous data. Because, and you can see that that little hat in the shortcut, that's control. The little hat is control. Change continuous data. So in my way, in my thinking, I've got that assigned, Control C. Control C. That's how, by the way, that's not a default assignment. That's one that I created. So change continuous data was under region. Now here's the cool thing, and this window looks tricky, but it's actually very easy because DP is very smart. It says, oh, you've selected audio volume and it's already put me in the field where I can add or subtract volumes, values, I should say. So let's do this together. I'm working with the mix with the producer, and the producer's like, you know, the end of this song needs to be a little louder. It's not loud enough. Okay, are you talking about this section here? Yeah, let's bring that up a little bit. I drag over it, Control C, brings up change continuous data, which we found under the region menu. I'm already in the proper field, so I can start typing. Okay, well, let's add 3 dB to that. Okay, I'm going to play it. No, it's too loud, it's too loud. Oh, it's still selected. Control C. Okay, well, let's bring it down -6. Apply. So now, it's a really unique score too. It's this really interesting Asian instrument. So that's a really very, very fast workflow enhancement. In fact, so fast I find that I've actually stopped using control surfaces, because, you know, DP does support Huey and Mackie Control and Touch OSC and Yukon as different you know, control surface protocols. We support all those. But let's back up and talk about what we just did, which was, let's start from scratch. Let's actually go back to the undo history, because I want to make sure this is very, very clear, because it's something that should save you literally hours and hours of work every day, or potentially, well, not every day, but should save you a lot of time in general. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the time, looking through my undo history here with you guys, and I'm going, when did I take the snapshot? Okay, where is it? Snapshot. So here it is. So I'm going to jump back prior to that moment. So there's no snapshot. I jump back in time. By the way, the undo history, you know, DP has this unbelievably sophisticated and deep undo history layer. Here, I want to talk about this just for a moment, because this comes up on occasion with questions from guys. Let's say, you know, you're working on a bass part, you lay down a part, it sounds great, it's done, you did one edit to it, and then you go on with your day and you've done all these other edits, and somehow something happened, the bass part got deleted. Oh no, the bass part got deleted. What am I going to do about this? Well, if you open up the undo history and you work your way back, and I'm a big advocate of not jumping all the way back to 3 or 4 hours ago. I always say kind of work your way back in chunks. Does that make sense? Like go a section, then go another section, and get back to the point where it says, oh, hey, there's why I recorded the bass part. Okay? So now if I copy the bass part, literally Command-C copy it, it's in the clipboard. I go back to the present time, paste. That's how you use the undo history. You go back in time, and then you can either highlight a file, export it to the desktop, or you can copy it to the clipboard, and then you go back to the current time and paste it. That's the way you want to use this window, is you want to rescue things from the past, or, you know, you can go back and stay there or do a save as. So we can dive into that with these seminars as well. But we went back before I took the snapshot, because I want to make sure that everybody's super clear on what we did for automation. So let's look at the soundbite layer. Okay, so here's a project with audio, and there's no automation at all. Okay, we're going to do the automation together. I'm going to hold Option and switch to the volume layer. Now, I could pencil in volume for each track. I could, but I don't. But let's do a snapshot instead. Let's do a snapshot instead. Okay, so how do we do that? I'm going to select all. And then we're going to go to the camera icon at the bottom of the window, look for the camera icon, or control quotation. Control quotation, we're going to take it from the beginning. It's going to be the visible tracks, and it's going to be the visible data type, which is set to volume. I hit OK, and boom, it writes in the point. There it is. I've got automation now across all my tracks. It's meaning it's anchored. So even if I move the fader accidentally, no, it's going to be where I set it. Okay, well now this is where we can use the temporary tools that today's lessons are all about, which is, remember, double tapping W. Okay, so we're going to double tap W, click on a line, every line gets selected. And now I can just start doing automation across all the tracks in my project. So it's very cool. And the next thing I showed you was using that shortcut, change continuous data, was the ability to take a bunch of points and change those. So I've just put in a move here, and I played it for the producer, and he doesn't like it. He thinks it's too loud here on the last section. So I'm going to lasso it. And I went to region, change continuous data. And now I told you the DP's smart. If it was pan, it would show pan. If it was whatever type of data it is, DP would automatically detect it and select it for you. All I have to be concerned with is the add. Now remember, you can add values or you can add negative values, but it's the same thing, right? So you can say, well, it's all, he said it was too loud. So let's try minus 2.5 dB. I just brought it down 2.5 dB, just that one section. Cool, so now we're working our way to the end of this piece. There's the second cue. I'm going to control drag in here. He wants the fade to be different, so I'm going to click a point, and he wants me to fade it out earlier. There it is, it's done. My temporary group, by the way, I've left it alone. If I want to release it, remember guys, it's single tap W. I single tap W, and this one I actually want to go a little longer. That's the percussion roll. So I've let that ring out a little longer than the rest of these. Cool. Are you guys with me? I mean, is this making sense? Are you guys, is this something that, you're learning from, hopefully? Okay. Well, cool. Excellent. All right. Well, so that's, now, hey, what we haven't talked about is, well, why would I use T as opposed to W? Remember how when we first started off, W was all the visible tracks, T was the selected tracks. So let's do that here just because why not? It just takes a minute to do. I'm going to select this track, and I'm going to hold command, and I'm going to select this track, and I'm going to keep holding command. Look what I've done. I've selected track 1, 3, and 5. You guys see that? So now if I hold the letter T and I change the points, guess what? It's only doing it for the selected tracks. So remember, W was all visible, T was selected. So that is a situation where, if you want it to be in the sequence editor and change the volume of selected tracks, you can do that, but this time you're holding the letter T. Cool. All right, so that's sort of the end of that lesson on temporary groups. Although the last one, you know what? Let's do just one more thing on the track groups for a second. I get kind of lost in these tangents here. I'm going to go back to my undo history, and we're going to jump back before my snapshot. No automation at all. Now, what if I create, remember we keep talking about temporary groups. What if I create a real group? If I select these tracks, Shift Command G will let me create a group from the actual selected tracks. Now, what are the attributes of the group? Well, let's just make it simply volume, just volume. And what's this going to be? I'm going to say, well, we're going to call this mix tracks. That works, mix tracks. Okay, I hit return. So now watch, when I go into the mixing board, these guys are definitely grouped. Okay, here's the last command, or single letter command that I want you guys to know from today. You know that temporary groups is W for visible and T for selected. Well, watch what I can do with the letter G. If I hold the letter G as in George, I can exempt a track from the group. Okay, you guys, I'm sure you all know this, but it's a cool feature to be able to exempt a track from a track group that you created. So G will suspend the group. Now watch what also happens. When I double tap G, you'll notice in the track groups window that I disabled the group. It'll turn off the group if I double tap G. Cool. All right, well, let's continue on our lesson here. I want to talk a little bit about the new memory cycle strips, okay? And we could do it in this project right here, a little bit of this mix. So let's just hear what this sounds like. Okay, so what we've done now in DP10, we've made it easier to be able to navigate with where you start and stop the memory, okay? The memory has to do with transport, okay? So what we're going to do right off the bat is I'm going to click on memory cycle, okay? You can see where it's set to. By the way, with help balloons turned on, if you can hover over any point in DP and you'll see, oh, that's memory cycle. That's great, memory cycle. So do you see the green bar now at the very top of DP? this is where you're able to set where does it start and where does it end, right? So if I wanted to just loop this point here, let's zoom in a little ways here, Command arrow keys, and I want to loop between bar 1 and bar whatever that is, I'm going to hit play. And it's just going to loop that point. So what we've done is we've made it very, very easy to set your loop points. It's very, very easy. You'll notice, by the way, that when we're in the tracks window, we have the same thing. You can set up, hey, I want to loop between bar 3 and bar 5. Okay, so now I hit play. And now you'll notice the tracks window is always snapping, but you can hold Command to toggle snapping. So if I hold the Command key, I'm able to change this and not have it snap to the grid. That's true of DP in general. Command will toggle whether something's snapping or not. So, but now with memory cycle enabled, we're actually looping, and it's so simple now. See, before you'd have to come in here and type in, or we had marker points where you could set your start and end, but now it's so nice to see visually where something starts and where something ends. So that's this button right here called memory cycle. It creates a green strip above any edit window where you can set your loop points, your start and your end. Okay, that's memory cycle. That's that third button from the left here in the transport area of the window. Cool. So now let's continue with some other cool shortcuts that we have. So let's deselect memory cycle. Let's go over here to, if I hover above here for a second, let's see here. Link playback to memory. Now this now has become blue. So what's neat about this is wherever I set this playback, DP will start from there. Wherever you set this will start the playback. So let's start it, we want to start, the client wants to start at bar 8. Cool. So how do we do that? Let's slow down for a second. What do we have here? We have a button that's fourth from the left called Link Playback to Memory. Link Playback to Memory. When that's turned on, you'll get a light blue strip. And wherever you set this, that's where it's going to play from. So even though it looks like I'm going to start from bar 4, hit play, space bar. Well, this is, again, cool stuff that you're going to use. Once that blue bar is up there, you know, you can just start and stop DP wherever you need to start and stop. And you don't have to going up here and punch any numbers in or anything like that. You can just simply move this. Remember, Command will toggle the grid. So you can say, well, I want to start right before bar 6. Of course, none of this music actually adheres to the grid, but that's not the point. You know, we're setting up the ability to start and stop. So are you guys with me here? We've got this, this button selected here. Great. And we're being able to start the playback. Now, here's a cool thing that I think you guys maybe are using or need to check out. If I select both of these, which is link the playback to the memory, so I could set the blue bar, but right next to it, guys, I have what's called link selection to memory. Now, I know it's confusing, but I want to show you what that really means in terms of like how easy that is to use. Here's the concept. I'm editing something, okay? In fact, we'll go into this window here. I'm going to switch this over to soundbite. I'm going to, wherever I select to make an edit, DP is parked there to play back. So let's work on the end for a second. So it's so fast. So what we did is we've got two things selected. We've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 from the left. And these are both linking the playback and linking the selection. So again, I'm lassoing a bunch of audio files, a bunch of MIDI files, whatever data I'm working on, and DP's right there to play back at that moment in time. So that's cool. We can visually move it here, or we can just make our edit, and then DP will play back from that edit. Cool. So that's, again, making sure you guys understand this, that these existed in prior versions, of course. We've had that around for a while, but just now being able to have that visual strip makes it so much better. It's so much easier to see the visual strip. So now let's do this. Let's actually take it one step further. Let's talk about auto record for a minute. And I'm going to switch back to my chunk called empty. We don't need the track groups window right now. So we're back in the land of empty, and these are all these MIDI tracks that I have selected. So we're going to say goodbye to these MIDI tracks. If I highlight them under project, we can delete them. Of course, we can right click on them and say delete. Now you'll notice that up here, delete tracks, it doesn't normally have a default command, but I've picked option D. Option D was available, by the way, and it's a good one for delete tracks. So how did I assign option D? We're going to go to setup, commands, and these are all the shortcuts that come with DP. And for me, since I work for MOTU, I like to try to keep and use the default commands as much as possible. And then what's not assigned, I'll obviously do whatever I feel like makes the most sense. So I'm going to type in delete tracks. And sure enough, there it is. There was nothing in this field. So I decided, well, I'm going to use option D. Now, if it's taken, that command, it'll warn you. Oh, and you can't use, Control P. But you can put your own. And now notice you have two fields. So if you wanted to have a duplicate command, let's say it's easier to get to a certain key when you're playing keyboards, you could have multiple Mac keyboard or PC keyboard commands to invoke a command. Now, the last thing I want to mention is we actually even allow you to invoke commands from a MIDI event. So what does this mean? If I have a keyboard that's sitting around my studio, a 2-octave M audio controller, I can actually use it for shortcuts in DP. All I would have to do is punch in the event, let's say, C1, C#1, I want it to be quantized. So I can just enter the command. The only thing you have to be aware of with the commands window, at the very top, you want to turn on master if you have MIDI commands. Master is for MIDI commands. Cool. I know we're kind of jumping all over the place. That's kind of my brain, unfortunately, here. Okay, so all we were doing essentially was setting up a shortcut to delete these tracks. So I can just go option D, they're gone. So I want to go back here to all these different cool shortcuts with the strip when it comes to being able to do memory cycle or auto record. So let's add a mono audio track. Let's do it together here. Let's name it Vox. And let's choose my input. Let's first of all, we're going to command, and we're going to actually make it a little bit bigger using the vertical zoom. I'm going to change the color here to blue. Now you'll notice, remember we went to the bundles, Shift U, I've got one input. This is the 414 microphone you can see here. So I'm going to put it in record. Now, one thing I'm not doing in Digital Performer right now is I'm not monitoring through DP because I don't want there to be any kind of echo or any kind of weird latency. How do I record into DP but not monitor? Well, the way you do that is under Studio, Audio Patch Through is set to off. So what does this mean, Audio Patch Through? If I'm recording, I can either monitor through Digital Performer or not. It's not going to affect the recording. The recording is going to make it into DP. It's just, do I want to hear it? If you hear it, then you're going to have to deal with your buffer. And if your buffer is super low, that's great. You're not going to hear any latency. But if you're monitoring it before it gets into Digital Performer, let's say from your hardware, then you don't want to double monitor it. So I want to make sure everybody's clear on this, is that you can either monitor, from your hardware, and MOTU obviously has lots of hardware ways to monitor your signal with no latency, or you can monitor through the DAW. So I've got it set to off. Audio Patch Through is off. It'll record the audio, but I won't hear it through DP. I'll hear the playback. I just won't hear it while it records. Okay, so how do I check the level? Well, I can check the level through Shift A, right? Everybody knows Shift A is the audio monitor window, and there's my level. Check, 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 check. You guys see the level? Let's look at another way to look at the audio level. Remember, Shift A is the audio monitor window, checking your level. But there's even a cooler way to actually check your level, and that is the meter bridge. So we have tracks, we have all our edit tabs here for our various windows. Let's go to meter bridge. And now look at this. We're going to take off the wraparound view. When I'm looking at, I'll deselect these tabs. When I'm looking at the input tab in the meter bridge, this is the hardware that's coming in. This is actually the level as it comes into your computer before it even gets into Digital Performer. This is the signal that's coming off your hardware. So wow, look at it. It says 1248, channel 5, check, check, 1, 2, 1, 2. That's a very nice long throw meter, very accurate meter. So as you're tracking drums, you're tracking a vocalist, and you want to make sure the levels are very precise, go to the meter bridge, select inputs, and you can see it. In fact, we can scale this entire meter to show just 12 decibels. So, and obviously from 0, from Unity, down -12. So if I talk really loudly, I'm getting close to -6 dB FS. And so now I can scale this meter. And the meter bridge is a really cool window because you know, you could say, what are my inputs? What are my outputs? Okay, here's my output from my 1248. My buses, what's happening with my buses? Well, you know, sometimes you'll be working on a mix and let's say a bus that you've got set up is really hot. It's clipping. Well, how do you know it's clipping? You might go into the actual meter bridge and select buses and you can see that something is really, really hot. But the cool thing that we let you do is do this wraparound view. Click at the top, and now in one shot, I can see my input, my buses, my outputs, everything in one window. I can see a feedback on everything that's coming and going in Digital Performer in one shot. That's actually pretty unique to DP. I think that's a unique window to Digital Performer. So meter bridge, super cool. You can see the level. And remember, Shift A was also a good way to do, Shift A is a way to see the audio monitor window. Okay, so here, what are we going to do with this anyway? So let's actually do something together here. I'm going to set up a loop, okay, and we haven't seen the green strip because start and end are in the same spot. We're going to stop the loop at bar 3. So there's my green bar, okay? Now, here's a cool thing, guys. I'm going to basically just loop record 2 bars. I'm going to talk. Now, I'm going to turn on overdub. And what's cool is when you turn on overdub with audio, when it gets to the loop point, it'll advance the take automatically. So it's going to go from take 1 to take 2 to take 3. So this is a cool trick in DP because if you're a saxophone player, you're a singer and you don't want to think about the computer. You just want to get into your headspace and lay down a track, and you're going to loop an 8-bar solo section, and you're going to blow apart and get to the next take, and you can just blow for an hour, and it's going to do 20 takes for you. So I'm just going to do this for you in a very quick little 2-bar phrase. So I'm going to hit record. Check 1, check 1, check 1, 2, testing. And it's going to the next take. Testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2, 1, 2. Take 3, testing 1, 2. I'm not touching DP. It's just doing it automatically. Testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2. Cool, I think I got the take. Not much of a take. So which one do we like? Well, I did 4 takes. What can we do with these takes? I want to see them all at the same time. Okay, well, let's do that. Let's turn these takes into tracks, all of them. Oh, cool, that's nice. I can see all the takes now. In fact, we're going to do a lesson, guys, on the comp tool, which I think DP's comp tool is phenomenal. And it's the idea of recording a bunch of takes and then creating a composite of all these different vocal takes. And that's a very cool feature. So we're going to undo what I just did. But let's back up for a minute. What did we just do in general? We set up a memory loop. Okay, we have an audio track in record. We turn on overdub. And as it gets to the loop point, it just goes to the next take, next take, next take, next take. And again, frees you up to not have to think as an engineer if you're a musician and be able to lay down a bunch of parts. Are you guys with me? Does that make sense? A couple more little things on the lesson. What about punching in and out? Okay, well, let's talk about punching because we've got the new strip that in regards to auto record. So let's do it. I'm going to delete this wonderful track here. In fact, we'll go back and we'll just go back to our undo history, and we're going to actually jump back in time, and we'll delete my tracks. Cool. So now we're going to add 1 audio track. We're back to square one. So what we're going to do this time is we're going to actually do, let's say, 4 bars. Now I'm going to turn on, right below the play is auto record. I'm going to turn it on, and now we're going to punch in. By the way, you want to make sure that below the left number meter here, it says in and out. This is punch in and out. So we're going to punch in at bar 2, and we're going to punch out at bar 3. And sure enough, once we set this up, once we say we're going to punch in and out at a certain spot, we see the red that indicates, that red strip indicates the punch in and out points. Okay, cool. Well, now when I record, it's not going to record until it gets to the punch spot, but it's still going to loop, and I still am going to overdub it. So watch what happens. Record. Check, 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 punch in, punch in, punch in, punch in. I'm still talking, but it's not recording because it's punched out on me. Okay, goes to the next take, check, 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 not in yet. Punch in, punch in, check, check, 1, 2, punch out automatically. And it did the take automatically. Goes to the next take, check, 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 check. So this is cool. We're doing two things at once. We're looping using the memory cycle, but we're punching in using the red strip to set where we're punching in, where we're punching out. And then we're also looping it and we're doing a new take. So this is cool where, you know, a lot of us are very fast when it comes to punching in. In fact, if I'm engineering a session, I almost never use auto record, to be honest with you. I like the ability to punch in on the fly. And DP has a pre-roll buffer so that a punch guard, so that it'll record prior to the punch. We can actually get into that. But anyway, you can always use now, we've got the ability to set up, you know, where are we looping, where are we punching? And so this is very cool. This is a cool feature. You guys following on that one? So we don't have to necessarily use memory cycle. We can still just use punch anywhere. You know, we can just say, well, you know, let's just punch between bar 7 and 8. I'm not worried about looping. I don't even care about looping. I don't even want to overdub. I just want to record and punch at bar 7. So let's do it. I'm going to roll in from bar 5. I'm recording. It's blinking, waiting, 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 waiting. Check, 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 check. Oh, we're punching in, punching out, punch out automatically. Cool. So that's easy. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. We don't have to use 10 different things. We can just turn on auto record and we can set the red strip to indicate where we're in and where we're out. By the way, one quick note, let's just talk about this as kind of a semi-advanced concept, but you guys are with me and I'm sure you're all veteran guys anyway. So let's talk about layers just for a moment. What does that mean, layers? Well, let's turn off auto record just for a second. And we're going to turn on overdub. I'm a big fan of using overdub for audio. Whenever I'm recording audio in general, I'm always overdubbing. What does that mean? That means if I have a track and I decide I'm going to punch, it will keep what's in the track and now create another layer on top. Okay, so that way if I need to pull back something from the previous layer, I have that layer. If I don't use overdub with audio, when I punch in, it just goes in. Okay, I don't want that. So generally speaking, maybe, and everyone's a little different, but I think using overdub when you record audio is a good idea. So let's talk about that. If I hit record, check 1, check 2, I'm going to just record some gibberish here of me talking, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So now I'm going to leave overdub on. I'm going to do a second, I'm going to punch in on myself. Check 1, check 2, testing, testing, testing. Share of me talking, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So see, look what happened. I have the original layer. I have the other layer. I'm going to do a third layer. Okay. Check 1, check 2, texting, testing, testing. Share of me talking. Test, test, 1, 2, 1, 2. So now this is where you might go, well, now things are getting sort of messy and layered. But here's how we can deal with that. If I go into the sequence window, and let's definitely zoom in here and get a good look. I'm using command arrow keys to move in here horizontally. So this was my first thing that I did. You guys see it? See how it's highlighting? And yet that was the overdub that I did. And this is the overdub that I did. Well, I don't want to look at the overdubs. I want to see the original part only. Okay, go up to edit, go down to layers, move forward. You see, and in fact, we won't even so much as move forward. We're going to actually go to layers under edit, and we're going to actually move to front. See, so if you're ever in a situation where you're recording audio and you're having a difficult time deciding, well, what's in front, what's in back, I can't really tell where I am. I did the original track, and now I've done some punches, and they're new layers, but I need to see, how can I see, you know, so, but now you're thinking, well, actually, what about now seeing those new layers? How do I see the new layers? So here's what I would do. Go back to edit, layer, and now I'm going to move this one to back, and boom, these other guys come forward. Now, I know this is sort of like, again, not something that we all use right off the bat. I just want you guys to be aware of the fact that when you have situations with multiple layers of audio regions, and this happens to all of us, we'll be in the middle of a session, and we're punching, we're doing all this work, and now we've got to clean it all up and deliver a mix. And we're looking back going like, well, what's what? You know, and sometimes you're in a situation where you need to bring a layer forward or back, and I want you to see where that is. So again, we highlight the original in this case. We go to edit, we go to layers, and we say move to front. And now that comes forward. Cool. So that's, again, one of those rare things that you might use, and just be aware of the fact that you can always push layers forward or backwards and so on and so forth. But yeah, so what we've done now is we overdubbed me talking here. And so I want to make sure that we're all clear on how to use these, setting up a loop. Once we turn this on, we're able to memory cycle, start and stop, and we can always change where this green strip starts, and we can hold command to get it off the grid. And then don't forget that we talked about having, if we're using this keyboard shortcut here, this link playback to memory, wherever we set this, DP will play from. And this is also, again, very handy. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then using both of those together, this is where when I select an area, DP puts the playback check there. 1, check 2, I'm gonna just, okay. And then this one below play, that's our auto record, which we went into, where we can set where it punches in, where it punches out. We talked about overdub, okay? Being able to overdub and have multiple layers. You know, in the case of MIDI, you guys know that if I lay down a piano part in overdub, now I can put another layer on top. It won't record over the MIDI data. It will let me include new information on the track if I put it in overdub. But for audio, it will put a new layer of audio. That's the difference between overdub for MIDI and overdub for audio. And then, of course, we have our count. Oh, one last thing I didn't actually mention to you, I want you guys to be aware of. Remember when we use this feature here called link playback to memory? And this is the one where DP will just play from where you are. You see this? There's one other thing I wanted to bring up. Do you guys see where I am with the mouse? This is pre-roll, okay? This becomes available when you actually use this link playback to memory, and it gives you basically a bar. So now, instead of playing at bar 6, it'll give me 4 beats going in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's playing. So you can use, sometimes you're in situations where you want to have a pre-roll bar. You're parked somewhere, the client's going to be rehearsing a guitar part. Hey, start me at bar 6. And now you're the engineer, you get to bar 6, but you don't want to have to start at 6, but then back up to bar 5. Add a pre-roll bar. So the client wants to work at bar 6, and you say, okay, cool, we're going to start at 6. I click on pre-roll. I'm going to give him that bar he wants going in. And by the way, I could change the duration of that. You know, I could make that an extra set of beats. If he says, well, you know, we're in 3/4 time, can you give me 6 clicks going into bar 6? Okay, sure. I turn on pre-roll, I stretch it over a bar, he gets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, boom, he's doing his thing, guitar. So remember, that's what I wanted to bring up, is when we're using link playback to memory, we have the ability to add a pre-roll. And that's pretty cool, so that the engineer doesn't have to double time work. I have to go to a certain bar and then I have to start 4 beats earlier, just turn on pre-roll. Okay, cool. Geez, I guess we've covered the topics. And I think we're a small enough group that let's just go live and let's just see where we're standing in regards to questions, okay? Let's just jump off the deep end here.
What platform, what Mac do you use?
Okay, so little about my system computer. So this is a Mac. This is running Mojave. By the way, DP will run on Catalina 1015. We're actually working on a version, some more updates for it, but generally it's working very well, and guys are running new computers on 1015. This is 1014.6. It's just a, you know, a Mac Pro 2017 i7, 16 gigs of RAM. You know what? Let's just talk for just a minute about computers, just for a second, for those who are in the market for machines, whether Macs or PCs. I'll talk for just a minute about Macintosh computers. And let's go into a program that I installed. It's at the App Store. It's free, okay? And this is called, we'll just search for it. It's the Blackmagic Speed Test, okay? I'm a big fan of everybody grabbing this free utility program from the App Store. But basically what this will let you do is to test the speed of your drive. How fast does it read and write the data? Because if you're using, you know, conventional SATA spinning drives, they're considerably slower, obviously, than SSDs. So I'm always a big fan of get as much as you can in terms of the disk space for your solid state drives. And it used to be that people would have multiple drives, you know, maybe one drive for samples, and one drive for the operating system, maybe another drive for video. And I think that way of thinking has gone away. Get one big, fast, solid state drive. You put your operating system on there, put your projects, your samples, all the sample library companies on the market pretty much let you put the assets, the libraries on whatever drives you want. So that's, I would say don't put everything on your internal drive, only put the projects you're working on. But this computer is actually, I'm impressed with how well this machine can keep up. And this is certainly not the latest and greatest, but Blackmagic speed test is a good way to gauge how fast your drives are. Let's go back into the Wild West here for a moment and see what other questions we have.
John Boylan here. You should tell everybody that those tools you had showing like memory record and those are dependent on the theme.
Okay, so let's switch back to Digital Performer for a second. Yeah, I mean, the icons here that John Boylan is mentioning here, he's a friend and DP user, is basically talking about, I'm using the default 9 theme, which I like. I'm sort of a big fan of darker themes myself, but we go back up here into themes, and we could try, some people are obviously fans of different kinds of themes, like carbon fiber is a very cool looking theme. And you'll notice that the icons change a little bit. So you just have to kind of get familiar with it. The good news is that when you hover over with help balloons, you're still able to easily see, what the name of the feature is. Cool. So yeah, just be aware of that with your theme. I'm actually using the default theme. That's sort of something I've gotten used to. Okay, JR. You raised your hand. What's your question?
So I'm unmuted. When you're in WW mode and everything's grouped together, is there any visual indication that that's happening?
There isn't any visual, unfortunately. No. Well, you'll get a feel for it. I mean, once you double tap W and you enter the data, just check and make sure that it's across the tracks. Still try to use these tools. They're very powerful, and it doesn't really prevent me from using them. I just have got a feel for when they're on and when they're off. And my habit is double tap, do the move, single tap, release. Okay, cool. We're going to move on, JR. Thank you for your question. Okay, so Ryan, I'm going to unmute you.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for your presentation, man. There used to be a command for punching in and out, a keystroke, ability to set a keystroke on the fly. Is it still possible to do that with auto record? So if you're playing a sequence, it's be able to hit a key and then have it start from that point?
So it looks like the default command for auto record is option 3.
But can you set, if the wiper is moving and you want to hit a keystroke to indicate that that's where you want your in point to be? You used to be able to do that on punch in on previous versions. I haven't been able to figure out how to do it with the latest version.
Yeah, I've never really done it on the fly. I mean, now that we've got the new strip, it's really easy to designate, where you're setting your in and out points. Yeah, I think I remember. I haven't used that feature in a long time where you can set it on the fly. I mean, it does give you a toggle for turning on, but you're saying, well, you know what? Let me go back to the commands window for a second. If we type in auto record, okay, so we can set auto record start. So it looks like you have F keys that will set your in and out points. You see that?
Okay, yeah, so that I can just hit that while it's playing. It'll
exactly. So it looks like the default commands are, and you know how you've got your function keys above on your Mac numeric on your QWERTY.
Yeah.
That's it. That's a good way to do it.
Okay, cool. I couldn't find that previously. Cool. That's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
You got it. Go for it, Roddy.
Hey, Matt, I want to appreciate everything that you're doing. And when you started talking about in terms of, not having the audio going through Digital Performer. I get that a lot with a lot of the delays. I'm using a Sapphire Pro 40, and that's fine, but I still got to have a way to be able to monitor while I'm recording, or I have somebody in the booth, or myself if I'm playing or singing or something like that. So how can we still hear like some of those effects maybe from Digital Performer, or at least get some feedback as we're hearing it without the delay? So
in other words, you don't want to monitor through DP. You want to monitor from the Sapphire, or because you have latency with you monitor through DP?
That's true, yes. And you actually said at the very beginning to do it that way. I think that's what I understood.
I want to make sure I'm clear on this. If we go back to my empty project for a second, I've got a simple vocal track. And, in my world, under Studio, audio patch through, I've got it set to off. So I'm not monitoring through DP. I'm monitoring upstream from the hardware. Okay. Right. So that way there's no latency whatsoever. Now, does your Sapphire, I think it does, doesn't it have no latency monitoring?
Yes.
So, but you're saying, how do you can't really control that from DP. There's no way to control it.
Right.
So unfortunately, what you'll have to do is you know, or, you know, if you have a fast enough computer.
My computer is pretty much the same as yours. It's a 2011 model iMac, but it's an i7 with 16 gigs and 3.5 gigahertz. So I mean, it's just a little bit faster. So,
well, you'll have to play with it and decide whether you can monitor through DP or not. I mean, one of the tricks that people do sometimes, if you have a client and they're going to do a vocal or an instrument, is you can make a stereo mix of your project, and so you only have one stereo mix, or maybe a set of stems. You have a click, the drums, you know, and maybe the pads and the guitars, all as single mixes. No effects are running, and then they can hear the click or without the click, and you can drop the buffer way down to 64. They can lay down their vocals, they hear reverb, there's compressor, they love the sound of it, it sounds amazing. They go home, you edit the vocal, then you turn back on all the tracks with all the individual breakouts and effects.
So you would put an actual reverb effect in Digital Performer while they're hearing it?
Well, what's cool is, yeah, if you're monitoring through DP, if I turn this over here to audio patch through auto or blend or input only, auto, let's say auto is when you're parked, and you're record enabled, you're hearing it, and you hit play, it's playing the playback. You punch in, you're hearing the input. So if I put an effect on this insert and I go up here to the mixer and I say, well, he wants to hear a little reverb, I'll go ahead and put in there the MOTU Proverb. Okay, Proverb stereo, and obviously it's going to come up extremely long tail, and it's going to be very, very wet. So I'm just going to give him a little touch of verb. And so now we're monitoring through DP, so I could have reverb, I could have compressor, you know. Remember, it's not printing that at all. It's just monitoring.
Yeah. It gives them a little bit of a doubling effect sometimes, but yeah, you got to play with it.
Yeah, see if you can come up with a good setting for that. And thanks for the question.
Thanks. Thank you.
You got it. Okay, I'll come back to you in 1 second, Ryan. I'm going to go on to Helen here. Hi, Helen.
Hi. For those of us who have literally years worth of commands customization, is there any place where we can get just a list of what DP's current default commands are?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because in here, you know, there isn't really, let me see something here. I can't imagine that, let me see here, save this PDF. How big is this bad boy? Oh, it's big. So did you see what we just did? I mean, this is something that's kind of an unruly long file, but I was able to print window from the commands and save it as a PDF file.
Cool.
And so that worked pretty well. And so, you know how in the print window at the bottom, you can obviously say, hey, I don't want to print the doc. I just want to see it in a PDF.
Right,
so
right.
Take a look at it. But okay, cool. Does that help?
Well, yes, but what I want is what the default ones are, because what's in my DP is my...
Well, you know what you would do at that point is just actually export yours as safety and then refer back to default.
Okay.
So
okay.
Yeah, export yours so they're nice and secure. In fact, this is a good point to bring up. You know, everybody's got their custom shortcuts that we've been, you know, creating for a long time. It's a good idea to put those on a thumb drive. You know, put them on a server, take them with you, because if you go to your buddy's studio in DP and you have all these fast shortcuts, you can load in your commands. Okay, so don't forget that you can easily do that. But in this case, and it's a good idea in general, you know, this is something on your system. When you do a time machine or a clone, these files are actually, you know, saved onto the backup or the clone. But I'm saying to take with you in a mobile way, you want to back them up, and then you can always revert back to default bindings, export the PDF, import yours, and you're good to go. Okay, cool. We're going to move on. Thanks, Helen. What other questions or hand raising do we have? Okay, cool. Yeah, let's just dig in. We've got a little bit more time. Tomorrow is all about pitch correction, and not just your everyday, you know, hey, I'm tuning up vocals, but really getting into how I could deal with entire audio tracks, entire sessions, being able to make cuts across multiple tracks and transpose audio. I've got some very good examples I want to show you of being able to deal with the pitch. And of course, now that we have, you know, the ZTX algorithm, DP always had, well, at least back to DP4, we've had a great pure DSP pitch algorithm that's built in. It's very, very good. And of course, now we've got even better with the ZTX to do polyphonic time stretching. So here, we'll just wrap up on doing a few more things in DP, some navigational stuff, and hopefully you guys will learn. And then tomorrow, feel free to jump back on at 9:30, and we're going to dig into pitch correction stuff. Let's talk for just a second about the ability to byte gain the volume. You guys see in DP10, you can see at the very left side, we have given you a fader for byte gain. You know, we all have kind of gotten used to that. It's a very cool way, very quick way to change the byte gain of a piece of audio. Now, the other one that I like to use a lot is byte gain. So now here's a shortcut I want you guys to get hip to. If I go to the commands window, Shift L, and I type in byte gain. By the way, commands don't have to be complicated. They don't have to have modifier keys, meaning Control, Command, Option, Shift. You can just use single letters as shortcuts. So in my world, N is for byte gain. So here's how quickly I can use it. I'm working on this. This vocal part needs to come up. N, I need to make that 6 dB hotter. This needs to come up to 15 dB hotter. Oh, it's clipping now. I'll bring it back down. So it's so quick to be able to byte gain all the files that are selected. So all we did, we went to the byte gain, we found out what the shortcut is. If there wasn't a shortcut, so we picked a command that's available. And again, people, it can be a single letter, it can be a shortcut. So now it's so easy for me to invoke that. Just go, well, N, and now I'm going to bring this up 10 dB. So now I've got, let's say I've been working, and I don't remember what the setting is currently. If I highlight it, you'll see along the top it says, oh, here's the track. Oh, it says 10 dB. That's the byte gain setting. I see. Well, here's the interesting thing about it. If I want this 10 dB to be actually 2 dB hotter, I don't go to N and say 2 dB. This is an absolute value. Does that make sense? So it's not a question of adding or gaining to what's there. It's an absolute value. So if I want this to be 2 dB hotter, I pick 12. So this is a wonderful thing because let's say you're working on a vocal session. Let me zoom in here. I'm going to grab, let's see here. Why is it being kind of grumpy here? Sequence editor. Oh, you know what it has to do with is this. Let me disable that for a second. So if I'm coming in here and let's say that I want to cut, I'm going to use the scissor tool and we're going to cut this audio region into various segments. Okay, now I'm going to just use byte gain. This one I'm going to make a little bit hotter. This one I'm going to make it a little bit quieter. This one needs to come up to 10. This one needs to, it's so fast. If you take a vocal track and you make it cuts, different regions, and now you're just byte gaining using the shortcut to invoke the byte gain. That's actually a very cool way as a producer to be able to make cuts. You know, that snare drum needs to be hotter. You know, this bass drum needs to be quieter. Instead of having to imagine how long it would take to actually, you know, apply a trim plugin or have to put in a volume move. No, byte gain. Byte gain is so much faster. And don't forget, we have the mute tool. Next week, we're going to do a whole lesson on the toolbar. But you guys know this one. It's a cool shortcut. When I'm hovering over an audio sound, I call this an audio region. If I hold the M key, will let me mute that region. Okay? And remember, mute is a toggle. So it's either muting or unmuting. So I'm going to mute that region, mute this region. Oh, I shouldn't have muted that one. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to unmute it. Click on it, mute it, unmute it. So we've made cuts. We've done byte gain to individual audio bytes, regions. Now we're using the mute tool to be able to mute entire regions. Let's see the remaining time here. Let's kind of just do a super fast, ridiculously fast recap today of what we learned, which was temporary groups, being able to use T for the selected tracks, W for the visible tracks. We talked about creating other groups and holding G to exempt tracks from the group. We talked about that. We talked about being able to, you know, we didn't talk about auto rewind, but that makes sense that wherever you want to start Digital Performer, you know, it'll automatically rewind to a certain point. We can tell it to stop at a certain point, and we can set that in any of the edit windows. We can say, hey, I want to start at bar 10, stop at bar 13. We can hold Command to toggle the grid. And we talked about setting up now the new memory cycle to be able to loop a section. And of course, we talked about the ability to use now what we call link playback to memory. DP will just start playing wherever we've got it set. We can use pre-roll as well. So if I turn that on, we can set it to a pre-roll bar. We've got the ability to, if we're making a selection, DP will follow the playback from where we're making our selection. We talked about doing auto record, which gives you the red marker to indicate when you're going in and out. And then overdub, we talked about for audio, if it's set to loop, it will increment the track automatically. So you can record and not have to deal with the track, you know, creating a new take. It automatically does that for you. So that's having to do with overdub. And then, you know, we talked also about going into the edit layers, moving things forward or backwards. If we have multiple audio layers sort of on top of each other, we can handle that. And then we talked at the very beginning about doing general, you know, setting up your system in general in terms of buffer size. You know, again, frame rate has to do with if you're dealing with picture lock. You know, most of us don't have to necessarily think about that, but our buffer size, our sampling rate, and so on and so forth. And then having the fastest system we can get, whether processor, having multiple cores, having, you know, a nice fast hard drives to play back your system from. All right, well, you know something, we're going to wrap today. And I want to say thank you to everybody for being here. And hopefully you can join me again tomorrow at 9:30. We're going to plow into pitch correction. So, okay, signing off. Everybody have a great day. Stay safe out there.